My name is Madison Sterling, and I am 31 years old. I stood before the iron gates of the Magnolia Estate in Savannah, Georgia, holding a box wrapped in gold paper, the physical weight of 60 months of invisible sacrifice. Before I could even cross the threshold, my mother, Kimberly, blocked my path. She did not hug me. Instead, she told me to stay back so I would not ruin her favorite daughter's perfect party. Then, my father, Thomas, looked at my offering with a cold, clinical disdain. He didn't scream. He simply flicked his hand with a sharp, dismissive motion, knocking the box from my grasp and sending it tumbling directly into the Georgia mud. "We do not want anything from a cheap stranger who abandoned this family," he spat. I looked at the wet earth seeping into the gold paper, and I realized, in that moment, that I was finally done. Welcome to Turning Tables Stories channel. I'm sitting here with a warm cup of coffee, watching the view and reflecting. There's a heavy quietness in Madison's realization that feels familiar when we finally stop fighting for a place we were never wanted. Where are you listening from today? And what's your favorite drink? Let's take things back 5 years to where this all began. I did not cry. I did not beg for a seat at a table that was clearly full without me. I reached down into the dirt, my fingers brushing against the cold, wet sludge of the Magnolia Gardens, and I picked up my box. The gold paper was torn, a jagged scar running across the top where my father's hand had made contact. I did not look at my mother's face, which I knew would be filled with that practiced Southern pity. I did not look at my sister, Alexis, who I could feel standing behind them like a queen guarding her throne. I simply turned around, and I walked back toward the gravel driveway. The sound of my heels on the stones was the only thing I let myself hear. It was a rhythmic, steady sound, precise, like the ticking of a clock. As I reached my rental car, the humid Savannah air felt like a heavy blanket trying to suffocate me, but inside, I was becoming ice. I placed the ruined box on the passenger seat. I did not wipe the mud off. I wanted to see it. I wanted it to remind me of the exact moment the daughter in me died, and the architect took over. I drove back to the hotel in a silence so thick it felt like I was underwater. My mind was not racing with questions of why or how they could do this. Those questions are for people who still believe in the romanticized version of blood being thicker than water. For me, that contract had just been breached. My family did not see a daughter. They saw a liability. They did not see 5 years of secret support. They saw a cheap stranger. Fine, if I was a stranger, then it was time to start acting like a professional. By the time I reached my hotel room, it was 12:03 in the morning. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed with a pale blue light, a clinical color that matched my mood. I did not go to bed. I did not even take off my coat. I didn't need to start from scratch. I had been quietly flagging anomalies and documenting every digital footprint for months, waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place. I sat at the small, mahogany desk, opened my laptop, and listened to the familiar hum of the cooling fan. To anyone else, I was just a woman on a computer. To my family, I was about to become the zero-day exploit they never saw coming. I am a cybersecurity expert. I spend my days finding vulnerabilities in multi-billion-dollar systems, and my nights building firewalls that cannot be breached. For 5 years, I had used those skills to protect the Magnolia Estate. 5 years ago, when the bank was 48 hours away from foreclosing on the Magnolia Estate, I intervened. I used an anonymous trust to buy the deed outright, becoming the legal owner without them ever knowing. For 60 months, I stayed in the shadows, letting them live in my house while I funneled $4,800 every month to settle the back taxes and maintenance. I had been the silent investor in their version of a happy life, footing the bill for a house I was no longer allowed to enter. Anger was not loud this time. It was not a scream or a tantrum. It was a balance sheet. I looked at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat, waiting for my command. I logged into the private portal of Savannah First National Bank. I had the override codes. I had the authorization. For 60 months, my name had been hidden under a layer of digital encryption, an anonymous benefactor that kept the lights on and the roof over their heads. I began the identity authentication protocol. My fingers moved across the keys with a lethal precision. I was not just stopping the payments. That would be too simple. I was pulling back the curtain. I initiated the formal withdrawal of my anonymous status. I triggered the bank's notification system to update the deed records. I wanted the next statement they received to scream my name in bold, black letters. I wanted the bank manager to know exactly whose blood and sweat had kept them out of foreclosure. I clicked through the security layers, my eyes reflecting the glow of the screen. This was not revenge. This was accounting. I had been overpaying into a relationship that had gone bankrupt years ago. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for decades. Now, the account was frozen. I sat back as the processing bar filled up on the screen. 100%. The identity reveal was active. The anonymous protection was gone. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single ounce of regret, but there was only clarity. My family thought they had a firewall built of heritage. And Alexis's charm, they did not realize that I was the one who had written the code for their survival. And tonight, I had just revoked their access keys. Inside the quiet hotel room, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and a quiet, clinical retribution. To understand why I stopped the payments, you have to understand what it took to start them. $4,800. That was the monthly price of my parents' peace and my own erasure. For 5 years, I lived in a 500-square-foot studio apartment in Seattle, where the windows rattled with every passing bus and the radiator hissed like a dying animal throughout the winter. My reality was a cycle of fluorescent lights, blue computer screens, and the bitter taste of lukewarm coffee at 3 a.m. I worked double shifts as a cybersecurity lead, taking on the graveyard projects no one else wanted, just to ensure that every first of the month, that $4,800 left my account like clockwork. I made choices that my family could not even fathom. I bought my clothes from thrift bins, and I calculated the cost of every grocery trip down to the cent. I did not go on vacations. I did not buy a car. I lived a life of total, clinical thrift, while my sister, Alexis, was posting photos of champagne brunches and designer handbags on social media. I told myself it was for the Magnolia Estate. I told myself that as long as the house was safe, the family was safe. But I have come to realize that for people like me, silence is not just a choice. It is a survival mechanism. It is what I call a prison without bars, a psychological trap where you believe your only value is your utility. I stayed quiet because I was trapped in the mindset of a survivor, convinced that if I could just carry the weight of the family's survival, I would eventually earn the right to belong. I was the invisible anchor, holding them steady in a storm they did not even know was happening, while they looked toward the shore and waved at the person who was merely pretending to sail the ship. The truth did not come out in a grand confession. It came from a phone call with my Aunt Angela, 2 years into my secret guardianship. Her voice was thick with emotion as she told me about the Thanksgiving dinner I was not invited to. She said, "Madison, you should be so proud of your sister. Your father stood up in front of everyone and gave a toast to Alexis. He called her the son of the Magnolia Estate because she has been the one paying the mortgage every month to save their home. Alexis had even intercepted the annual property tax assessments, lying to my parents that she was handling the paperwork and payments with her own commissions to spare them the stress. I sat in my dark Seattle studio, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Alexis was not just letting them assume she helped. She had systematically stolen my sacrifice and weaponized it against me. She had convinced my parents that I was the ungrateful daughter, the bitter stranger who had disappeared into the city to hoard my money, while she played the role of the self-sacrificing hero. My father did not just overlook me. He actively resented me because Alexis had written a script where I was the villain and she was the savior. I had spent nearly $300,000 to fund my own execution. My loyalty had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and Alexis was the one collecting the interest. Alexis's retaliation did not take long. It arrived via a notification on my lock screen. I watched the phone vibrate against the mahogany desk, a series of pulses that felt like an intrusion into the surgical silence I had created. She had posted a high-resolution photo from the anniversary party. The composition was perfect. My parents, Thomas and Kimberly, sitting on a velvet settee, flanked by Alexis and her husband. The background was the lush, green garden of the Magnolia Estate, dripping with moss and southern prestige. But I knew the original frame. I had been standing just to the left of my mother. In the version the world saw, I had been cropped out with digital precision. I was an unwanted edge, a stray shadow that did not fit the brand of blessed unity Alexis was selling. The caption was a masterclass in passive-aggressive narration. So grateful for the hearts that stay, the love that never wavers, and the daughter who truly keeps this family whole. 400 people liked it within the hour. The comments were a chorus of validation for a lie I had funded for 5 years. I looked at the image, and I felt a clinical curiosity. It was fascinating to see how a golden child operates. Alexis did not just want the money, she wanted the moral high ground. She needed the audience to applaud her for a sacrifice she never made. Then came the audio, a voicemail from my father. His voice was thick with a southern drawl that used to sound like comfort, but now sounded like an old, rusted machine. "Madison," he started, his breathing heavy through the speaker. "I do not know what you were thinking, showing up here and trying to make a scene. Your mother is in tears because of your cold-blooded behavior. You have always been bitter, haven't you? Jealous of your sister's light. We do not want your excuses, and we sure do not want your mud-stained boxes. You stay in Seattle. You stay where people like you belong." I replayed the message twice, not because it hurt, but because I was documenting the inventory of their delusion. Thomas and Kimberly had fallen into a dangerous psychological trap, the trap of normalized cruelty. In a family with a golden child, the parents do not just favor one, they actively dehumanize the other to balance the scales. My existence as a villain was a necessary requirement for Alexis to remain their Sunday. To them, my 5 years of silence was not a gift. It was a baseline expectation they had never bothered to acknowledge. They had turned their own daughter into a subscription service, with me footing the bill and them canceling my access the moment I asked for a receipt. A text followed from my mother. "Madison, Alexis is devastated. She worked so hard on this anniversary, and you humiliated her in front of everyone. We require a formal apology before we can even consider letting you back into this family. Think about what you have done." I looked at the text and felt a profound sense of relief. They were not asking for a relationship. They were not asking for love. They were asking for a performance. They wanted me to bow to the sun so they would not have to look at the shadows, but I was done playing a supporting role in a tragedy of their own making. I did not answer a single one of them. I did not defend my name or explain the bank records. I went back to my laptop and opened the encrypted folder labeled Forensics. It was time to stop looking at the emotional damage and start looking at the criminal record. I reached out to Dave Keller at First National Bank. His tone was different now, professional, cautious, almost reverent. He knew the anonymous protection was gone, and he knew exactly who had been carrying the Sterling family for 60 months. I did not ask for an apology or a seat at the table. I asked for a complete forensic audit of every account tied to the Magnolia Estate. I am used to hunting hackers in the dark, but this was different. This was personal. I enlisted the help of a colleague from Seattle, a forensic accountant who specializes in tracing embezzled funds. We sat in my hotel room, the glow of twin monitors illuminating the space like a sterile operating room. We were not looking for memories. We were looking for the kill shot. The data began to assemble into a pattern of systematic betrayal. While I had been funneled $288,000 into the mortgage to keep the bank at bay, Alexis had been operating from the inside. She had used her status as the trusted manager of their finances to create a vacuum. Then we found the withdrawal. $45,000 taken directly from my parents' primary pension fund. It had not gone to the estate. It had not gone to their anniversary party. It had been transferred into a private account Alexis used to pay off her own failing real estate ventures. She had exploited her limited power of attorney status to bypass the bank's secondary security filters, convincing the automated systems that she was acting in our parents' best interest while she drained their future. But the lethal discovery was the authorization slip. I pulled up the high-resolution scan of the document. There it was, Kimberly Sterling's signature. My mother's hand, or at least that is what the bank was supposed to think. I have spent a decade analyzing anomalies in digital data. I know when something has been manipulated. The pressure points on the ink were too consistent. The angle of the letters was a mirror image of Alexis's own writing style. It was a forgery. The realization was clinical. Alexis had not just stolen the credit for my sacrifice. She had committed a felony against our own parents to fund her vanity. The golden child was not just a narcissist. She was a predator. I did not feel a sting of sadness. I felt the click of a puzzle piece locking into place. This was no longer a family disagreement over who paid for dinner. This was a criminal investigation. I downloaded the notarized proof, the signature analysis, and the trail of the $45,000. I wrapped the digital files in a secure, gold standard encryption fitting, I thought, for the next gift I was about to deliver. The sun was about to witness a total eclipse. I stared at the forged signature on the screen until my eyes burned. My mother had trusted Alexis with the keys to their life because I was the cheap stranger who had abandoned them. They had handed their future to a thief and called her a hero. I thought about the 5 years I spent in that rattling Seattle studio, eating ramen and working until my vision blurred, all to protect the woman who forged this document. The irony was heavy. Every dollar I put in to save the house, Alexis was pulling out to save herself. It was a perfect zero-sum game of betrayal. I did not call the police yet. I did not send a warning text. I just saved the file to my desktop, and I renamed it the Sterling Audit. I looked out the window at the Savannah skyline. Somewhere out there, at the Magnolia Estate, they were probably still laughing, still toasting to Alexis's success. They were still living in a house built on my silence and her lies. But the foundation was already gone. I had the documents, I had the proof, and tomorrow I was going to hand them the bill for everything they had taken. The knock on the door came at exactly 9:15 the next morning. It was not a request for entrance. It was the frantic pounding of people who had just realized their firewall was gone. I did not rush to open it. I took a slow sip of my coffee, adjusted the 2 monitors on the desk, and made sure the notarized Sterling audit was the first thing they would see. I opened the door. Thomas burst in first, his face a map of high blood pressure and southern indignation. Kimberly was right behind him, her hands clutching a designer handbag like a life preserver. Alexis stood in the hallway, her usual radiance replaced by a pale, sickly gray. "What the hell have you done, Madison?" Thomas shouted, his voice echoing in the small hotel room. "The bank has frozen our primary accounts. They are talking about legal inconsistencies and third-party withdrawal flags. Dave Keller will not even take my calls. You unfreeze our lives right now, or I swear to God—" "Sit down, Thomas," I said. My voice was a flatline. I did not call him Dad. I used his name like he was a client who had breached a multi-year contract. He froze, more shocked by my tone than the command itself. Kimberly began to cry, but it was the loud, performative kind. "Madison, how could you be so cruel? Alexis told us you were bitter about the anniversary, but to mess with our finances? To humiliate us at the bank? We are your parents." I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the gold-wrapped box. The Georgia mud was dry, now a dark, ugly crust on the torn paper. I set it right in front of them. "Let us talk about finances," I said, my voice clinical and quiet. I handed Thomas the 60-page transaction history. You told the whole town Alexis was the hero who saved this house. You toasted her for 5 years of mortgage payments while you called me a stranger. Here is the reality. 60 months, $288,000 total. Every single cent came from my checking account in Seattle. Alexis never paid a dollar. Not one. Thomas stared at the pages, his hands shaking. The columns of $4,800 transfers were undeniable. His face shifted from rage to a horrifying, hollow realization. He looked at Alexis. She would not meet his eyes. But that is not why your accounts are frozen, I continued, leaning back. I handed Kimberly the forensic audit and the signature analysis. While I was putting $288,000 into your home, your golden child was pulling $45,000 out of your primary pension fund. She forged your signature, Mom. She stole your retirement to pay for her own failing real estate debts. The silence that followed was absolute. The image of Alexis's prestige shattered in real time. This was the illusion of power from an empty wallet, the realization that their status and their son were built on a vacuum of stolen money. Without my secret funding, they were not a dynasty. They were victims of their own favorite daughter. Kimberly grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. Madison, please. The bank is talking about fraud charges. They will take the house. They will put your sister in jail. You are a genius with these things. You can fix the records. Just tell them it was a mistake. Do something. I looked at her hand on my sleeve. Then I pointed at the gold box on the table. I spent 5 years doing everything. I said my voice like a final judgment. I lived in a studio and ate ramen so you could keep your gardens. I protected your pride while you pushed my heart into the mud. I saved your past, but I will not fund your lies anymore. I am done. I stood up and held the door open. Thomas looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Alexis was already heading for the elevator, her shoulders slumped, finally realizing that no amount of charm could overwrite a criminal record. The bank has all the evidence, I added. I suggest you hire a very good lawyer. You are going to need one. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. The daughter who paid the bills was officially out of the office. I flew back to Seattle that evening, then moved on to a consultation in Washington District of Columbia 3 days later. I did not wait for a phone call that I knew would be filled with excuses. I had already deleted the family group chat where Alexis was the sun and I was the shadow. The bank was handling the criminal referral for the $45,000 forgery, and the Magnolia Estate was legally mine to do with as I pleased. 3 days after the confrontation in Savannah, my doorbell rang. I checked the security feed. Thomas and Kimberly were standing on my walkway. They looked diminished, their clothes rumpled as if they had slept in their vehicle. They had taken the first flight out of Savannah and a frantic taxi ride from SeaTac Airport to reach my front door. They looked diminished, their eyes red from a sleepless cross-country journey and the crushing weight of their new reality. They did not come with a demand this time. They came with a rewrapped gold box, the corners taped with a trembling hand. I opened the door and stood there, not as the daughter seeking a crumb of approval, but as the owner of their future. I invited them in and made tea, the steam rising between us in a kitchen they had never seen. Thomas spoke first, his voice stripped of its usual authority. Madison, we have spent 14 hours realizing we pushed away the only person who was actually holding us up. We were blind. We are so sorry. Kimberly pushed the gold box toward me, her eyes red from the road and the regret. I did not reach for the box. I did not offer a tearful reconciliation. I looked at them, and I established a boundary made of steel. I do not need you to compensate me for the past 5 years, I said quietly. That $288,000 was a gift to the memory of who I thought you were. But I need you to be responsible for the future. I am no longer your invisible anchor. As for Alexis, her crimes are now in the hands of the law, and she is no longer welcome on this property. But for the two of you, if you want to remain at the Magnolia Estate, you will do so as my tenants under my rules. I eventually founded the Magnolia Guardian Firm, a cybersecurity agency dedicated to protecting elderly homeowners from the kind of financial predators they never see coming, even when those predators share their last name. I found my peace, not in their apologies, but in the quiet mornings where no one else gets to narrate my worth. I have come to realize that kindness is not a debt you pay to buy love, it is a seed you plant. But if the soil you are planting in is toxic, you have every right to move your garden. Forgiveness is not always for the other person. Sometimes it is the only way to set yourself free from a contract you never signed. Do not let your loyalty become a weapon that others use to stab you in the back. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that the most powerful thing you can do is reclaim your own story. The best revenge is not watching them fall. It is becoming the most brilliant version of yourself that they said you could never be entirely on your own terms. You are enough exactly as you are, and you do not need anyone's permission to be luminous. If Madison's journey inspired you, please hit like and subscribe. Do not let anyone else write the script for your life. I will see you in the next story.